Hi, my name's Amy Dahlberg, and the paper I'm presenting on is the three-way game model for privacy-preserving cybersecurity information exchange framework. So the main idea of this paper is that if organizations share cybersecurity information, then they can gain, they can make their information more secure because they'll know more about the different vulnerabilities that other people are experiencing. But the problem is that they need to find a way to effectively share between organizations, attackers, and Cybex to make this sharing effective. So cybersecurity information exchange can protect organizations' resources, but the problem is that there are trade-offs. So sharing this information can, there's some sensitive data that can be contained when they're sharing. So organizations have to take on this privacy risk, or they can try to sanitize their data, except sometimes that makes the data less relevant when they're sharing it. And also throughout the paper, cybersecurity information exchange is listed as called Cybex, and that is the system that the information is being shared through. Also, if attackers see this information on security vulnerabilities, they can use it to launch successful attacks against organizations because they now know they're vulnerable. And Cybex sets the correct values for participation fees and sharing incentives to try to get organizations to join, so it stabilizes the entire system. So game theory, the authors propose this as a dynamic game that's incomplete with imperfect information. This helps because they're trying to resolve the trade-offs between sharing advantages and privacy exposure, and it's easier to do with a game model because it leads to, when you have all those different strategies listed, it's easier to calculate what the optimal strategies are when it's in game form. And these optimal strategies are what help set the different admission fees and incentive rates and everything to get organizations to share effectively. So the players of this game are the attackers, the organizations, and Cybex. So the job of the attacker is, or the strategy for it is to attack organizations. It just has to decide which ones it will attack in what order. Organizations first decide whether or not to share their information with other organizations, and then they decide at what rate do they sanitize their data, their sensitive data, before they share. And then Cybex sets the incentive rate and the admission fees to again try to get organizations to participate and continue participating. Cybex has to make it worth the organization's time and resources to participate in this system. So the utilities for the attacker, there were a lot of equations for this, so I tried to simplify it a bit. So on the bottom left, that image, you'll see that corresponds to what I've written out for under utility equals. So the utility for the attacker is based on the probability of them launching a successful attack, the profit of that attack, and then they are just subtracting their investment in exploiting the vulnerability, so the resources that they had to pay. Their goal is to maximize that total gain by minimizing their investment and exploiting the vulnerability, but while increasing the probability of successfully exploiting it. So the utilities for an organization, they're based on the probability of a successful attack being launched against them, and the profit or loss of that attack, or in this case loss, the incentive rate after they've sanitized their data, and the privacy cost, and then they're also subtracting the admission fee to use Cybex. Most of these components are broken down into further formulas, which you can find in the paper. I left them out to try to simplify what's going on here. But below you see that formula should correspond with what I've written out. And this is for a single, anyway, the goal of organizations are to maximize their utility by applying the appropriate sanitization rate. So the utilities for Cybex are the sum of the utilities of organizations participating in Cybex, while also acknowledging the admission charge and the incentive, but most of those are contained in the formula for the organization utility. Moment. Okay, so for attackers, so first of all, the authors did a series of simulations to try to take their optimal strategies, their proposed optimal strategies, and prove what they would do with numbers plugged in. But first, the optimal strategy proposed for the attackers is if the total gain of the attack will be less than the investment requirement, then they shouldn't attack. And then their best strategy is to attack an organization who's not sharing information through Cybex, because that organization won't have as much information about vulnerabilities that can be exploited. And then after that, the attacker can look at each individual gain that they might get and decide what organizations to attack. And then the graph on the right is from the simulation. So the authors set different, set the variables in the equations to different amounts, and then their findings were that sharing cybersecurity information decreases the chance of a successful attack, while joining the system is not costly. So in this graph, you can see that attackers had a much better utility when they were attacking an organization that did not use Cybex. And then the gray bar shows that when there was a lower sharing rate, but they were using Cybex, it was still a lower utility than if they didn't use Cybex, but it's a higher utility than attacking an organization that uses Cybex at a higher sharing rate. Okay, so the optimal strategy for organizations is finding the optimal sanitization rate to maximize the expected utility function for the given state of the world. So that is given in a complicated formula down below, but I will just look at the graph for a minute. So with the higher sharing rate, organizations, as you can see, the green, had a higher utility, and then blue is the second highest utility and second highest sharing rate, and then below the red is not using Cybex. So there are benefits to using Cybex and having the higher sharing rate, even if the line gets less steep, it still is higher. So for Cybex, their optimal strategy is to charge each organization depending on how much the organization can save from participating in information sharing. So they want to be able to charge organizations and get utility from that, while still giving enough incentive for the organizations to take part in Cybex and information sharing. The incentive rates should be chosen to be less than the total gain of other organizations' benefits of accessing the shared information. So they don't want to charge, or they don't want to give too much of an incentive, because they're also trying to gain utility from this. So the equations for the organization's utility and for Cybex's admission charges and incentive rates, they show that admission fee should be as low as possible, and the admission fee value should decrease as the number of organizations increases. I'll talk about it. So, in the graph on the right, I'll talk about the static and dynamic aspects in a minute. But the expected utility for Cybex grows as the number of vulnerabilities exploited grows. because they're if the number of vulnerabilities exploited is growing, then it means that organizations have a higher need for using Cybex. So on the graph before, you saw that it said static and dynamic. In the simulations, they did static values for their incentive rates and admission charges first, and then they tried dynamic, which is with this algorithm. This algorithm serves to change it like as more information is coming in, and so change it dynamically to fit is whatever is changing in the game. But they found that applying this actually benefits Cybex and its expected utility. Because it anticipates what's happening. So, I know that people interpreted the scope of improvement in different ways. I'm using it to say sort of what the authors saw was going on with existing systems, and what they were looking out to improve. So, they said that information sharing achieves cyber situational awareness, so organizations can better protect their sensitive data, operational control from shared information, and it can help reduce cyber risk and increase security posture. So the authors emphasized how important information sharing is, but it listed a few problems or challenges that they sought to try to touch on. So there can be a lack of trust among sharing parties, a risk of privacy violations, and the absence of a standardized platform and infrastructure for information sharing and consumption. So the first and third one can be addressed by using Cybex. So Cybex sort of helps initiate trust, because it's a intermediary sort of, and then it also provides sort of a standardized option to share information among organizations, and then the risk of privacy violations can be addressed through their through the sanitization of their data. So overall, this paper proposed a three-way game model with attackers, organizations, and Cybex, and they propose that using that organizations who find an optimal sanitization rate can really benefit from using Cybex, and Cybex will benefit also, and it can lower the amount of attacks. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.